it looks like from Atlassian's perspective, that Trello is never going to be kind of like this thing that's going to make them lots of money and become like their flagship product.
I don't know, the rules of Agile, the governance of Agile, I think is what ultimately makes Jira shine.
With Jira, the community and the people around it who are contributing are people who are administering it, configuring it, and not so much end users. Where I think with Trello, because there's less of that configuration stage, the people that are using it are the end users.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Summer of Atlassian. Today I got Dream Sweet Mike, and maybe from his t-shirt you might can infer what we're going to be talking about, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of mentioning of the T word in this call, right?
Probably more than the J word.
Probably more, yeah. Well, yesterday we came up with the D word, the F word, and now we got the T word.
Yeah.
Welcome,
Yeah.
Mike.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah,
think
thanks.
that we've ever met. So why don't you tell
No.
me who you are, what the Trello Trailblazer, and we just start from there.
Yeah. So I'm Mike, also known as Dream Street Mike now. So I am from the UK, and I set up a business about 3 years ago in Trello Consulting, and it was kind of something I stumbled across. I'd spent a decade of my working life before that working in certain businesses where Trello was being used, and quite often it was being used in conjunction with other systems. So it was really something that I learned to kind of be able to do more and more things with, and I was really pushing to do quite complicated things because companies I was working for were asking for quite complex systems, but they didn't have the budgets to spend on sort of out of the box CRPs and CRMs and that kind of thing. So I was really pushing sort of Trello to the limits. And there was a general theme across all of these companies, whether they're sort of big, medium, small, is that quite often the bigger systems that were being implemented were they weren't really that user friendly for the end users, and quite a lot of the time for small businesses they weren't really practical, obtainable, affordable. So when I started my business doing consulting, I actually started it with doing project management consulting, and it quickly kind of shifted into just developing Trello solutions because I realized there's lots of people out there that love Trello, but they weren't quite sure what they were doing with it, and they kind of wanted a little bit of help along the way. So that's what got me into that, and since then it's kind of developed into a full-time job trying to promote Trello as much as possible, fighting Trello's corner because it is a little bit unloved amongst many. I think the people who use it love it, but generally speaking, it doesn't get the support I think it deserves. And yeah, trying to just do more and more with it. And yeah, I love its flexibility. I think I've used a lot of tools out there, and for me, Trello is one of the most versatile and flexible solutions out there, and that's why I love it.
It's such an interesting perspective because, like, I don't know, I've used Trello, right? So I know if
Mm.
anybody has ever seen me talk about Trello knows I think where I stand with respect to Trello. And I think I only do it like half jokingly too, right? Like I think most of it, I'd say like 95% of my hate for Trello is just to mess with Brittany. It has nothing to do nothing to do with the tool itself. But it's just an interesting tool, right? Like there's just so many options out there, and I think yesterday we were saying it um, pretty well, right? Which was if you don't know if you need to use Jira, then try Trello first,
Yeah.
right? And I thought that's what resonated with me the most during our conversation.
Yeah, and I think Atlassian really missed a trick there in like potentially using Trello as a stepping stone, because it looks like from Atlassian's perspective that Trello is never going to be kind of like this thing that's going to make them lots of money and become like their flagship product. But like it could definitely be that stepping stone towards the rest of the portfolio, and I think they kind of missed a trick there.
Why do you think Atlassian bought it then?
I I had a theory, but like it's a bit of an out there theory. I think that I think to an extent there was a lot of features in Trello that they can sort of see value in, and if you look actually Jira Work Management, which has now moved into Jira, there quite a lot of the more visual things have been kind of stolen from Trello. So there was obviously a demand for that kind of slightly more visual capability of Trello. At the time, I kind of looked at it as they saw Trello as more of a threat than perhaps they wanted people to think, and it was easier to buy it to kind of control that threat. Um,
Mm.
and and the reason I want to say that is because I think I said yesterday on our call that the first time I come across Trello was when I was working with software developers who were using RTC, rationality and concert, but they were using Trello to actually manage their day-to-day work, and visually they're using it for information radios because it was just too much going on behind the scenes in RTC. So there was a use for Trello there, and I think that is kind of where it sits now. It can be a really quick, visual, uh, easy to use tool, but kind of allows people to get up and running. It's also that like it's got a really shallow learning curve compared to some of the other systems. And I do spend a lot of time using other systems. I have used Jira in the past, and again, like you, I'm not. My hatred for Jira is not real. It's kind of like it has a place in the world. We've got to kind of play along with it. But it definitely has its place, and it has its place in the right companies. But I'm really a firm believer of the tool should fit the need and fit the person as opposed to the person in business is shaping the tool. And one of the reasons why I love Trello compared to some of the other systems is that you end up the tool becoming the focal point. And with Trello, you can really make sure that that's not the case. And yeah, I find it easier to do that with Trello.
Interesting perspectives. When did you and Brittany meet?
So we've never met in person, which is something
Wait, even
we
till
want to
today?
change. Yeah, we've never met. Um,
So where were you in
I was
April?
literally I was in Sri Lanka and I just couldn't. It was logistically not possible to get to the US and back. So yeah, a part of my life is that I'm from the UK, but I spend eight months of the UK. That's outside of the UK in weird and wonderful places, mostly sort of in the Far East. But it flips. So last year I was in Central and South America in April time, and then yeah, this year I was in Sri Lanka and India. So yeah, I was trying to convince Brit that she should make the stop to Barcelona in October, but I'm not sure that she's going to be able to do that. So yeah, all of our kind of relationship has kind of just grown online, and it started with me just chatting to her on Slack, and then the more we got chatting, the more we realised that we were like totally in tune with everything, even the way our minds work. It's just like I would do something and Brit's done exactly the same thing. So we end up sort of bouncing off each other. And now if I have something I can't quite crack, because typically we're the opposite ends of the scale in terms of time zones as well. So like at the end of the day, I'll say, oh, this is not really working for me. Like hand over to you, and then in the morning I'd wake up and should have some response to it, and vice versa. So it's become this kind of like tag team of Trello excellence that we've created.
And now where does the fun man come into all of this?
Um, he's a very strong advocate of Trello, and a really good perspective because he's not solely Trello, so he's really useful for that. Again, haven't met, and looking forward to hopefully meeting them in October. He's also
How have you not met these people?
and mostly because I'm never in the country, so like I'm never nearby. I'm always somewhere far away. Like, generally speaking, in really remote places as well. So like my kind of working life is a little bit different to most. But
Well,
yeah, I'm hoping
uh,
to change that in October, and hopefully
yeah, I
you'll
was
be able
like,
to make it as well.
we'll see. As you saw yesterday, we have an open Jira ticket for me to get a passport, so I gotta be able to
Yes.
leave and enter the country again.
So yeah, there hasn't really been much revealed about October yet. I don't know what exactly the scale of it is, how many people they're expecting, what the topics will be. I don't know anything, but I know that the Trello team are keen to do some specific things. So there might even be something useful or something interesting that has come in Trello's way.
It's interesting. Like
Hopefully, it can be a positive.
I know Atlassian historically has put together like those Unleash events, couple of others, right? Like I forget the names of them, right? But they have auxiliary events throughout other parts of the world, in addition to their Atlassian team conference in the US. And I don't know if I've seen it before, but I would assume that this is not a common thing to do on other team, but in Europe.
No, it does seem to be pretty new. Yeah, because what they do is just the information's there for people to kind of create these events, these big events in other cities, and there's normally one sort of in Europe and one in Asia. But yeah, it came as a bit of a surprise. I wasn't expecting that, because you don't. There's no point in doing an event that just replicates what's already happened. So they've got to do something new and slightly
Well,
different, I think.
so you got to imagine that 300,000 customers, how many of those are based in the US versus Europe? What I find most interesting is when I look at the app, like the marketplace, the Elastic Marketplace, most of the folks that I interact with are not US based.
Yeah, interesting.
And so that's always super interesting to me because almost every sponsor that I've had is literally not based in the United States. It's very rare. Like I would say, it's almost like a for every 10 sponsors, like 8 of them are non-US.
Yeah,
So it's crazy, like how
and
many. It's
yeah,
crazy
the
how big
Alaskans.
the Alaskan.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. I mean, it's not the US isn't exactly the most central place in the world either. So if you look at, they span the world. Like the US isn't the central place for people to gather, is it? It's like for people traveling from Australia or the Far East.
It's a little
It's a long,
farther.
long way. Yeah.
I live in Southern California, so we have everything we need to not leave. So I
Yes.
never have to. I never have to think
Yeah.
about even going anywhere else.
Is that kind of part of the sort of thought process of do you need to go to Barcelona or not?
Yeah. So I'm like, I was telling Bob and Ronnie, like they're very excited to go, and I'm like, guys, team's coming to me, right? Like I don't even have to go anywhere next year.
Yeah.
It's all coming to me. I live in a very
It's
interesting place in the world. I recently took some time off because of my anniversary, and like people are like, "Oh, what you do? Where'd you go? Like, what was like what was on this agenda?" Right? And I'm like, being from Southern California, it's one of those things where you can go places, but without having to take off like PTO or use up your vacation hours because you just go in the afternoon, right? Like you go after work.
yeah, nice.
Like Disneyland's like a 20-minute drive from my house, 3 minutes from my parents' house, right?
Yeah,
And so there's so many
that's
theme
a big.
parks, so much entertainment. In Anaheim, right? There's the stadium for the Angels for baseball, but it's a multi-purpose stadium, right? So like there's a lot of events, concerts, just all kinds of happenings that come through Southern California that like you don't there's no reason to go anywhere.
Yeah, and now Atlassian are coming there, so
And now Alaska's coming. So
even more.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
just gonna make it all perfect. Yeah, a lot of people just like, why don't you have a passport? I'm like, because everything comes down here to SoCal. We have the perfect weather for every event.
yeah, that's something that can't be said for the UK. So it's the middle of summer at the moment, and it's been really cold. I've come back from India where it was like 45, 46 degrees Celsius, and yeah, the UK is about a quarter of that.
Yeah, no,
It's been quite
I'm
shocking.
dying at. We've been hitting like 39, 40 here in where I live now,
Mm,
and I'm like dying. Because like
yeah,
35 was like common for where I lived in down in San
yeah,
Diego for a summer day. But yeah. So weather aside and amazing geographical opportunities that I have aside, why don't you walk me through this whole Trailblazers thing? I know we talked about it briefly yesterday, but this community, this channel is a little bit bigger than the Jira Life. So, what's the deal? What's the story behind the Trailblazers?
yeah. Well, I'll tell you the honest story. So, Britt and I really just started only recently doing things together. We've been chatting a lot and we bounce off each other, but we're like doing specific content together, and it all came about from the decision from Trello to change the free package, and they kind of came to us before it was announced. And to be honest, we both brushed it off, thinking, "Oh, it's not going to be a major problem." And then like the shitstorm hit, and yeah, it was definitely a bigger issue than we were anticipating. So then we started to do sort of live streams about that specific topic. And at the time, I was part of the Atlassian Solent chapter in the UK, which is the one I shared with Dan Toombs, who you know as well. And
We
I
heard Dan
he
tunes.
yeah, so he was doing a brilliant job doing in-person events, and I would say that my participation was really limited to doing online things and also setting up some virtual events, because I realized that there's a real appetite for in-person events amongst Jira users and partners in the UK. I can't find anyone who's using Trello and who's willing to say so in the UK. So I was
Publicly
struggling to
admit
kind of gain
it. Don't
even
worry.
when we
Here
had
in the
the
United States, it's
Trailblazers.
just as bad. It is just as bad over here. I was talking to Brittany about this. Well, I don't know. It's like 2 weeks ago when I was doing her episode, and she's like, "Yeah, there's like a lot of Trello people." I'm like, "Name one," and she's like, "Mike," and I'm like, "Someone who's not in your inner circle."
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's like, but yeah, there's like a loads of there's closet Trello consultants, and we're starting to uncover a few of them, and also Trello users. We know they're out there, and we've got some statistics, and we've got information coming from Power Up developers to suggest that there's a few areas like Brazil is a really big area for Trello. They're generally using the free version. But yeah, there's a lot of people in Brazil. There seems to be quite a few in Japan, and then countries like Spain and Germany in Europe. But yeah, I can't find any in the UK. I'm sure there must be some.
That's
so
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 interesting.
yeah,
I don't know that I've made like one or two videos on Trello, but it's usually to compare it to Jira. But I don't know that
hmm,
I've ever done a Trello video to see how it performs. I'd be very curious
okay.
now. I've had
Yeah,
this I've had this idea to take Brittany's book and turn it into YouTube videos.
yeah,
But I don't know how she would feel about that. I don't think she would care.
yeah.
She'd be like, "Do it, Alex. I have no time to do this. You do it. Better you than me."
I think it's maybe a symptom of the way of the tool as well. Like with Jira, there's an ecosystem. I would say, and you can correct me if you think differently, but with Jira, the community and the people around it who are contributing are people who are administering it, configuring it, and not so much end users. Where I think with Trello, because there's less of that configuration stage, and they come to Britt and I and other consultants to design things, but it's so much more basic than the likes of Jira, that the people that are using it are the end users, and actually looking at the events that the Solent chapter did, even for Jira, like I would say about 80% of the people who joined those events were not end users. They were like administrators in their company, or they were solution partners in the UK. So like with Trello, we're kind of trying to find a direct way into the end users and get them really like geared up for and passionate about it. I doubt there's people who are going to be as excited as we are about everything Trello, but we're trying to find those people. In the community, there's a lot of people who come to the community to ask one question, but once the problem's solved, they kind of like don't come back. So part of the whole Trello Trailblazer thing is to try and like, how can we get these people to actually like come back and forth and actually contribute a little bit, and come to us for help, and we can like not just us, but connect them to other people who also use the tool and have ideas of how things can be done. Um, so yeah, the
So,
Trailblazer kind of come from that.
so much to unpack with what you just said, though. Numbers from my end. My videos, I don't want to say they're 50-50 split, but for the most part, I think they're almost, I try to at least, my intention is for them to be 50-50 split between what's a video for Jira admins and what's a video for a Jira user.
Yeah,
Where I run into trouble, where I run into problems is that on the Jira admin side, there's like a whole following, right? Like there's a lot of admins. But on the user side, it's so diverse. Because
yeah,
there's just like the Jira admins as one bucket, and that's a bucket, and I kind of put that to the side. But when I'm looking at it from a user's perspective, I struggle internally a lot with this because I have Scrum Masters, right? These are people that have taken certain certifications to become a Scrum Master. They're quote unquote role at work is to be a Scrum Master. And so they just want to know how to use the tool from a Scrum perspective. And so I usually appeal to a lot of those people, and a lot of my videos are agile based, right? Where I talk about story points and what's an epic and what's a story and what's the difference between a story and an epic and all that good stuff, right? But that category I think is very well defined. Then I have like product owners who are like more requirement management that use Jira or use the tool or interact with the tool from a requirements perspective, right? Road mapping, if you will. Then I have the actual users, right? So now, like, I think there's so many hats, right? Because Jira is a it's a strategic and execution type of tool. Where I see Trello as an execution tool, right? You jump into Trello to
Yes.
just
Yeah.
get things done, but in
Yeah.
Jira you don't, right? Remember, so yesterday, yesterday when we were talking about I forgot if it was Andy or you, but somebody was like, I hated that in Jira you jump in and you're not like in your board, right? Like the things is
Yes.
not in
Yeah.
the
Because
board, and I'm
Andy
like.
said that.
But I'm like, that's the whole point. Like, you don't want everything to be on your board. Jira is like very prescriptive, right? Like, you're supposed to capture everything that you got, like all the fires and all the things you want to do. But then you very strategically, using facts and data, cherry pick items and put them into your board, right?
Yeah.
You're very intentional with what what your team will actually work on. And I think that's the
Yeah.
beauty of Jira, right? Because again, and this is where I struggle so much with tools like Trello, and I struggle with you guys and your the way you guys manage and use Trello. Because with Jira, I'm given a box. Okay, I keep thinking my camera's over here. I'm given a box, right? And that box is like the rules of Agile.
Yeah.
And within that box, I can get very creative. I can make Jira do anything I want. But at the end of the day, I still have this like garden, this safe walled off garden that says, hey, as long as you stick within the rules of Agile, you're gonna be fine. So I can make sure to do anything I want, but at the end of the day, I'm still optimizing it for a team to deliver or work off of an Agile process. You guys don't have that walled garden. You guys just have like a do garden, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think it's interesting you say that because I think that the difference is that you with Trello you could build like you wouldn't necessarily have the walled garden to protect. You'd have to build the walled garden before you can protect it.
But
But you certainly
that's
can
a
do
whole
within those
different
same
mindset,
confines.
though, right? That is
Yeah,
such a
yeah,
different mindset because when you come in to drive a solution with Trello, the world's your oyster. Anything
yes,
goes, right? Like you can come up with any solution for anything, and I think that's
yeah,
amazing. But it scares the crap out of me because I'm like, where do you even start? Like I always have to
yeah.
find
And
the
you know
beginning of
that's
it.
that's why I'm surprised there's not more people like me in Britain. We are finding it because, and I've said that this has been quite a common phrase of mine, but like Trello's biggest strength is its biggest weakness because you open a Trello board, and I think beforehand, if you created a new Trello board, they would have stuck to doing done on the board. Now you just get an empty board, so it's like it's a completely blank canvas, and that's what I love about it because I know what to do with that. So depending on what we need, or what someone needs, I know exactly what to do with that. But for someone who's starting fresh, like what we find is, and what I find when I speak to people who come and contact me is that you know, they've started with that blank canvas and they've got a kind of direction because they know their business, but they don't quite know how to realize it, and then they kind of lose their way, and then they start you know questioning the first time they did it, and then trying something different. And so yeah, it's definitely a case that lack of structure can work against it. But that's again why it's important to understand how to use it. And I think it's also important to sort of suggest. Like, so you said that most of the work that you do is in the confines of agile, and that does give you a fairly defined scope. Whereas with Trello, like I've spent uh, almost 20 years when I was working for companies in software development companies or like tech companies. And so I've dealt with a lot of developers and a lot of engineers, and it's really, really, um, it's kind of like a very defined environment. And software developers, their personality types are typically like they fall in a certain way. And then when I started this and decided that Trello was going to be the thing, it opened my world up to like now my clients are like so far away from just software development. Like you get people in mortgage brokering, real estate. I've got a few people in like doing medical stuff, and um, creative content is a big one. Digital marketing and creative content. It seems to be one of the biggest areas for Trello. But these are all areas where they don't necessarily work within the bounds of something like Agile. They have a process that's really really specific to what they want to achieve, especially in digital marketing, because digital marketing is kind of saturated right now. So they have to find a slightly unique way of working that differentiates them from the rest, and that's where Trello becomes really powerful, because they can create a whole machine, a whole system that is very very dynamic and suited to their specific need.
But that's also, again, like you said, the biggest pitfall, right? Because you're gonna have a team that is like, let's just say, into digital marketing, and they have a way of doing work. But the question is their way of doing work the best practice? Because one of the biggest challenges I'm always faced with as a solution architect for Jira and is what's the best practice, or what's the best way of doing this, right? Or is this the correct way of doing this? And I would assume that I would have a really, really hard time answering that question if I was like a Trello solution architect, right?
Yeah.
Because with Jira, I'm like, yeah, I can tell you exactly how you can use Jira to be 100% effective, and then you can wiggle from there. But like businesses, like I think we can go back to the conversation of, like, you said something interesting about like software developers and businesses using Trello, right? But like I think this is where I have my biggest challenge with Trello, which is the team that I work with, we want to standardize the tool. We want everybody
Yeah.
speaking apples to apples, right? Because when you're running a multi-million-dollar business, the moment one team is talking apples and the other one's on oranges, you're gonna have a miscommunication. And that miscommunication at first might not cost you a lot, but long term, you're talking millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in lost revenue because of failed collaborations, right? Misinterpretations. People that operate in one way are interacting with teams that operate in a different way, and they assume that each other's like they understand each other, but they're so far removed from each other, right? And that's what freaks me out about Trello, because or tools like Trello, tools like Monday, Asana, ClickUp, right? Like I think the biggest marketing sell that they do for these tools, which is like, hey, you can do whatever the heck you want, however you want, right? Like that's not a selling point for me, right? Like
Mm.
that is like the anti-selling point for me, because, and that's why I love Jira software, and that's also why I freaked out when the last one's like, we're getting rid of Jira work management and Jira software. We're just gonna make Jira, and you can do whatever the heck you want with it now, and that freaked me out because like, we're removing again this garden of like process and going, you can do whatever you want, but doing whatever you want is not always the right answer. At least if I'm running a
No.
multi-million dollar
I mean,
business.
I would argue probably that there's some of those other tools that you mentioned are kind of closer to Jira than they are to Trello now, because you look at the path that Monday's taken, where they've created this what they would call one tool for everything. Um, they really sort of shifted from that now. Now they basically created separate product lines for sales, CRM, service, for devs, and they so now they've obviously decided that that's the best path for them, and that's probably closer to the sort of more structured approach that Jira has. Um, and Trello is definitely, for me, Trello is definitely one of the outliers, and I always worry that Trello looks at that, or Lassie maybe looks at that and thinks, okay, this we need to change Trello to be more like them, and I don't want it to change, and I think most of its users don't want it to change. I think the bits that scare you are the bits that excite me. Um, and
But how
it
do you run
probably
a
is the case
business
for a lot
with
of the users.
Trello? How do you run a business where everybody has such a unique process?
Well, I mean, I would say my business, I specifically went targeting small and medium businesses. Because my last company was very very small. They were growing rapidly, but they were very small. And at the time, they were looking for certain business systems, and we're talking like enterprise grade solutions, but they were being pushed away because they're just too small. They didn't have the budget for it, or certain tools just weren't right for them. So when I left that company, I really wanted Trello to be the like targeting small and medium businesses to give them the opportunity to have similar systems, but at a fraction of the cost and something that's obtainable for them. So I think so. I work with businesses that are running their entire business. Like I'm talking every single business process in Trello. So they've got multiple teams, and each team may have a slightly different process, but they're all running, and they're able to use Trello to move work items between different departments, different groups, able to collaborate. They're running things like HR, sales. They're using Trello for everything. So that's quite a common thing. But we're talking about businesses with a sort of size of like 30 to 150 people, that sort of range. So really into the SME range, and Trello fits perfectly for them. I think. I think Britt and I were a bit disappointed about Trello not being part of this Atlassian for startups, because we see there's a perfect opportunity, and that's what we see through people we deal with. But I can understand why they've done it, because they're looking for the next company that's going from startup to huge. But yeah, it is entirely possible, and everyone I deal with is running their business in Trello. The people I'm consulting with, they're running the majority of their business in Trello, and doing it relatively successfully.
I have to go take a look then because, like I said, I just feel like the structure is so critical, right? Like, I don't know, the rules of Agile, the governance of Agile, I think is what ultimately makes Jira shine. And I think the moment you take that away and you have a tool that doesn't have it, like, because so many tools, like, there's like Airtable, right? Like, just there's so many tools out there that just allow you infinitely customization. And that's cool, right? Like, I think there's a place and a market for that where you are working on something, it doesn't matter what that something is, these tools are adaptable to fit you. And I think it's great from an I think you said you said this a couple of times, and so I just want to touch on it. You've been saying Trello for like personalization, right? Like I feel like the relationship between the user and Trello is very individualized, right? It's like I'm configuring Trello for my process, right? And I'm configuring Trello for what I need it for. Correct me if I'm wrong, because the next part
Uh,
I'll build on that.
yeah, well, it's true to an extent, but there is. I mean, I'm dealing with business that have got defined business processes, and they are using Trello for that. And I guess those are the sort of people that would contact the likes of Brit and I to make the system so it can be standardized. Now, I'm very very conscious with my clients too. I've got kind of like a background with Agile, so I understand it. I was never on board with all of it, and I was always conscious of the
Nobody
fact that
is.
Agile,
Nobody listens unless you're
yeah,
Mike Cohen.
yeah, and so, but there are certain concepts that like are essential parts of any design of Trello systems I have, and one of them is the like consistency of data and a process through the boards. So one thing you'll find, if I was to take a customer who have had some Trello boards and wanted me to look at them, I'd often find they've got Trello boards and people have just been adding labels left, right, and centre. There's 50 power ups enabled on the board, and the first thing I'd do is start to knock that back and say, like, what's the minimum viable process that you need, and build a board with a structure. So I'd always make sure that instead of using labels to tag things, that they would use custom fields so that the data set is consistent. I'd make generally speaking Trello boards make them sort of workflow based, whereas a lot of people use like the list to categorize things. So I try and shift them to a workflow base and try and get them to use the tools within Trello, the date functions, the member functions, the label functions, and create something that then basically, okay, this is the process for this group of people, this team. Okay, we're going to replicate that for another team. If we do need to make some small adjustments, we can, but generally speaking, just the back end structure is the same. And I try to make that an important part of what I do, especially when I'm working with companies that have got multiple teams, because data consistency is so important for that.
you gave me an idea. It'd be really interesting. You know how yesterday we were coming up that whole like battle of Brittany versus me
Yes.
versus solving the problems. On the flip side of that coin, I would love to do like a collaborative session with Brittany, where instead of battling each other to see how we can come up with a solution, I would love to have like Brittany and I side to side, or you and I, or Trello and Jira, right, side to side,
Yeah.
and say, hey, um, here's a custom field in Jira. Here's what it's used for. Because when you said that whole like labels to custom fields, like that pricked me up because that's exactly what I tell people to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how to architect. So I'd be super curious to see how a Trello admin thinks and or compares to a Jira admin, and how we come up with
Yeah.
these solutions from similarities and then differences, because that might open up. I think for a lot of end users, right? Like when you're a business, right? And this goes back to your Atlassian for startups and being omitted from that. When you are when you're a new company, you have to make a call, right? And and you have to pick a tool. And a lot of people pick Jira mainly because all their buddies are using it or they use it in a previous company.
Mm.
But I think like the theme from yesterday, right, which is Jira is not always the best solution, right? It is overkill in a lot of situations, right? Especially
Yes.
when you're in a startup type of thing. And I didn't even know it wasn't included. I haven't really caught up. I haven't been paying attention to the whole Atlassian for startups yet. I just haven't had a chance
Yeah.
to even look at the
I
releases and
mean,
everything.
I think I understand why it's not included, because I think the whole purpose of that program is a pathway to progression for companies that will then, potentially be the next big company that invests in enterprise level Jira and Atlassian tools. So Trello kind of just muddies the water a little bit because it doesn't sit within the Atlassian product ecosystem as much as they try to integrate it.
Yeah.
They seem to be now it's diverging slightly. So I think I understand why it's not included, and I think I agree with it. But
But if
what I
I'm
would
the
say is that
founder, but if I'm like the founder or co-founder of a company, right? My team's nowhere near ready to do agile, and so
yeah,
why toss them into Jira? Because the,
exactly, yeah,
Jira requires a certain level of discipline and rigor that other tools just simply don't, right?
yeah.
Like I feel like you can be successful with Jira because Jira is infinitely customizable as well, but you're like handicapping yourself if you're not taking advantage.
I think so, yeah. And I think that with Trello on the other side, with the companies I'm working with, I said they do sit in generally in industries that at best semi-tech, but sometimes completely non-technical. And so these aren't creating business processes around any specific methodology. They've come up with an idea and they have great knowledge of it. What I try and do is with the emphasis on uh, process before tool, um, I put it back on them and say like, okay, you want me to build it? Tell me what your process looks like, how your process runs, and Trello should be molded around that. So I do often I create processes based on what these companies um, want their ideal process to be, as opposed to using any sort of defined methodology that's out there. Because again, like you said, they're not ready for that. These are startups. These are companies that are in industries that don't have those kind of insights, and uh, so that's where Trello fits perfectly, because they've got a particular process for doing something. Generally speaking, with small medium businesses that aren't in the tech industry, they're doing something that's quite unique, and that's their big selling point. That's what makes them
Yeah.
successful. So
What
you want the
Aladdin needs
tool
to
just to
do,
be.
what Aladdin needs to do, they need to come up with like a promotion program,
Mm,
right? Where you can graduate from Trello into Jira and
yeah,
have a, because I can import Trello to Jira right now, but it's like a one to one, and it's not the
yes,
right thing. It's
yeah.
not the right.
It's not quite right. It's kind of like it's something flat going into a 3D world sort of thing.
Yeah, that not only that, but again, we go back to this whole. I think of Trello as being 2D Super Mario, right? And I think of Jira being 3D Mario, and like it just like it works. I think what was it Nintendo did Super Mario, new Super Mario Brothers, which was like a 2D in a 3D world, right? So it technically can work, but what I find when people are shifting from Trello into Jira, they're frustrated with Jira because they're like, why are my statuses so vastly different than the columns
Mm.
in your Jira Trello board? And I mean, because over here in Jira, you don't have to. I feel like the way Trello sets up their boards, or at least the boards that I've seen, like they're so individualized, right? Like they're like gonna work on this tomorrow column, right? Something I'm gonna do like in a month column, like not as important column, right? Like you have these columns that like logically in your mind, you're compartmentalizing things in the way your mind would compartmentalize information, right? But in Jira, we don't do that, right? In Jira, we don't have like a work on next week. We have a sprint. Whatever's in that sprint, you're gonna work on next week, right? And so you don't
Yeah.
need a status that says, "Hey, I'm gonna work on this next week," because the fact that it's in your sprint implies that you're working on it next, or like you're
Mm.
immediately working on it, right? And if you're not gonna work on something that's not a priority, you stick it in the backlog, right? So we have like different compartmentalization techniques that I think again don't translate well between the two tools. But
Yeah. I think, I mean, the truth be told, you could what you've just described, you can absolutely build in Trello.
but
There's no
why?
doubt about that. And yes, that was that's a good question. And so what I was going to say was not the answer to why, but you could build that in Trello, but no one's asking me for that. So yeah,
That's
there
why I
is
like
no
the why.
reason to build it.
But then we
I
go
mean,
back to this. But we go back to the startup like new team, right? Like I was listening to one of the influencers that I love listening to from a business perspective, acquisition.com. They're based on Vegas and they just help companies scale their businesses. And the CEO, she was like, "We use Trello." And I sent her a message on Instagram like, "Why not Jira?" She hasn't replied. But it got me thinking like, why would a multi-billion-dollar business like use Trello when there's no structure?
you might find that it's exactly that reason.
I just my brain can't grasp it. Like it's maybe because I've only ever known Agile. Like I grew up.
Yeah.
My first job in college was like we everybody got thrown into the Agile Kool-Aid immediately. Like your first week on the
Mm.
job, everybody has to take their Agile training. And so I've only ever known Agile and like to work on a tool that doesn't extend that belief, it's just hard for me to
Yeah.
understand.
I think so. I think that, my eyes were opened when I started this business and started working with yeah, sectors that I'd never dealt with before in the past, and that really opened my eyes up to the difference between what I would say the difference between Jira and Trello being is that like there's a specific place where Jira fits, and if someone came to me and explained that they had a software development team of a few people and they're producing this product. Like I wouldn't think twice about saying, okay, Trello's not the right thing. Have you looked at Jira? And there's a few times when there's things popped up on the community where it's quite clear that Jira is the thing that they should be looking at, not Trello. And I always believe that you should try and give people the best tool to fit their needs. And so I'm quite happy to do that. But there's definitely a lot of use cases where Jira isn't that, and that's really something that's come to light from doing this. And when you work with, quite a lot of my businesses that I work with are in really strange industries where they've got very different workflows to what you'd expect in kind of a development environment. And so this is where you kind of learn that you can't kind of box people into a single thing, and that's where Trello I think comes into its own. What it does mean is that you are creating something from scratch. But you also it's amazing watching these journeys because someone will come to me and they'll be fairly certain of what their process is, and I'll build them something based on that. And within 6 months, it's evolved into something completely different. So yeah, Trello also has that adaptability. Like you can constantly just evolve it, and I think you can do that to an extent in any tool, and they should be continually evolving and adapting to changes in business. But with Trello, the journey of growth is kind of really quite extreme. And I think that more people see that it's more than just a bunch of post-it notes on a digital whiteboard, and more when they realise it could be so much more than that, they start
Yeah.
to really do some real weird and wonderful things with it.
I don't know. Trello just I feel like Trello would just give me a really bad case of like writer's block. I'd just be staring at that blank canvas and going, what the heck do I do with this?
Yeah, and to be honest, that happens to me sometimes. Sometimes I have an idea in my mind, and it's the case of it because they give you nothing. That means that there's multiple ways of doing things, and so you do have to try and picture what would be the best way. Uh, so it's not always clear cut, and especially my brain kind of works in multiple levels. So I'm constantly trying to connect things in different ways, and trying to put together that sort of bigger picture in Trello can be quite challenging. And it kind of, I guess it comes up on a case to case basis when customers come along and they've got a specific thing that they want to do, and that gives me the idea to solve their problem that I can then think, okay, that's a structure that I can use again, and that's kind of where the background knowledge comes. And so when things happen now, it's quite natural to do certain things in Trello to make that work.
Very well said. I don't know that I think for me to ever get over my fear, I think Brittany and I, or you and I, would have to swap places. You just throw me into the deep end of
Yeah.
Trello.
Do you know what I would love to do is, and to be honest, this is what I've been doing a lot. So quite often when you work in niche markets, I'll take this more. For some reason, I don't know how it came about, but I started to get a lot of work from mortgage brokers in Australia. I don't know why, but it started with one and it kind of carried on. And they all had a very similar workflow, but they also had they worked through an aggregator. So they had this piece of software that they all had to use and they didn't like it. So a lot of my time was spent just looking in that software and taking all the bits from it and putting it in Trello. So it was kind of like a CRM system for mortgage brokers. And so I managed to take all the key bits of that and turn it into a Trello version. And I think I'd be quite keen to do the same with Jira, because when you were describing sort of the structure of Jira earlier, like that can definitely be replicated in Trello. With it obviously won't be as fully fledged, and you won't have
Yeah.
some of the advanced features like road mapping and different views, but definitely the basics of agile structure can be very easily replicated, so it works in the same way as what Jira does. So I'd be quite keen to do that, and maybe if you looked at that, there would be more familiarity there.
Yeah, and I think that would be super interesting too, right? Because as much as I tout like Agile and like the structure of Jira, that is starting to become an edge case in Jira, Bill, right? Not every team is. I'm of the thought that Agile. Let me make sure I don't like get put on like blacklists here. I don't want to say controversial things, but I'm of the belief of just get it done.
Yeah,
Right? I'm a get it done type of guy, and I like Agile, but like you said earlier, right? Like there's a lot of it I could care less for, right? And if you've ever seen any of my trainings, my approaches to Agile are very not like what's his name? Mike Cohn would be like he'd come after me with like a machete if he saw how I evangelized Agile, right? Like it's not designed the way that they wanted it. Because I my structure of how to use Jira is for effectivity, right? It's for communication, collaboration, and throughput.
yeah,
And a lot less like, oh, we got to follow the rules of like no documentation, no. Yesterday I did a training on how to use Jira for Scrum Masters, and like I don't know why, but the most controversial thing I can say in that training is assign your stories to your team, and everybody's like, agile teams are supposed to be self-organizing and they're supposed to just like cherry pick, right? Like not once in my 14-year career have I seen a group of individuals where you're like, here's 20 tasks, go forth and figure it out. Like everybody's like, not me, right? Like nobody is gonna go do the hard thing instead
yeah.
of that hard assignment that you give them, right? Like everybody's gonna like dance around that hot potato, right? Like so sometimes you gotta like somebody's gotta have the spine and give and assign the work and right. So again, not to derail the whole conversation, I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole, but all I'm trying to say
I
is
think we could have a long conversation with
yeah,
about agile actually, because
yeah.
I've
All
got
I'm trying to say
that's
is that
been quite
yeah,
a journey for me.
right. So like I'm saying like Jira, as much as I tout that Agile has this or Jira has this Agile garden that gives it its structure, I like to innovate a little bit outside of it, right? But I still like to stay close. And I do believe that a lot of teams can benefit, maybe not from just Agile from a pure perspective, but the mindset of thinking small. right? The mindset of that continuous feedback and trying and like exploring and just like, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. Let's try a little subset of this so that we can see and get some data so we can then make a multi-million-dollar decision. And so I like to evangelize that. But oftentimes, right, usually my approach is if a team, like I've built Jira for a financial, it's kind of like a tax, an accountant. There we go. That's the right word. Right? I built it for an accountant that did taxes and a bunch of other accounting like work, and they basically turned Jira into a CRM. And you can do that through a Kanban method, right? Like where you don't have the sprints and you don't have the backlog and you just have a board with your stuff. And so I don't know, like I do believe that there's so many different ways to skin this cat here. And I think it'd be interesting to see, like, again, compare and contrast.
Yeah.
How would we do it in Jira versus how do we do it in Trello?
Yeah. The other thing
So
I thought about Trello being like talking about this idea that actually you could use Trello to your advantage if you're going to end up using Jira eventually is I see Trello as a possible tool to kind of prototype what you want in Jira because you can do it quickly, you can do it easily, you can do it with without going into sort of any in-depth setup and like so you can visualize what you want to achieve and then build that in Jira. I see that's an area that I've kind of been looking at with Trello because it could be a really useful tool for that.
yeah, no, interesting perspective. But we'll have to definitely get a meeting of the minds and get everybody into a room.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I think we can do something cool like at Sajid's level where he's like, "Are you smarter than a Jira admin?" Now that you guys have your Trailblazers and the Jira Life has its chapters too, maybe we can play off of that fact that we have these Atlassian communities and
Yeah,
maybe make
definitely.
something like that. But I think it would be an interesting perspective. I think a lot of people would like it because I see the millions and millions of users, right? Like you got to think that they have the same struggles internally where they're like, shoot, which tool do we use? Like, how do we use it? Which one do we use? Why
Yeah,
should we use it? Right? Because I've been on the end of the table where you're like, you got to evaluate tools and figure out which one is the one your company is going to invest in. And I really
mm,
do think Atlassian, if they're listening, right, they should really figure out like a graduation program.
I think so. Yeah, I think also Atlassian coined this sort of phrase "work life," and I think that the best piece of software they've got for
For
that
work,
phrase is Trello because
I would
as you look
100% agree with you.
yeah,
100%.
so I think they could be really playing on that as well, and that also would lead into a graduation from Trello to Jira, and I think that's kind of what they were trying to do with Jira Work Management. It didn't quite work, but yeah, I think now we see like for the first Trello Trailblazers event, like it was pretty much like a majority of people were using Trello for personal and for work purposes. So there's clearly that area that's being that I know there's some people out there, especially in the Atlassian community, are using Jira for personal projects. But generally speaking, like you wouldn't, it's not the most suitable tool for sorting out your weekly dinner plan, meal planner, or sorting out your holiday, or planning your wedding. That it can be done, but like Trello is definitely a better tool for that. And I think Trello is going to sort of, I think there's going to be more play on kind of the personal productivity side of Trello as well, because that's an area that differentiates it from Jira. So it'd be interesting to see whether there can be something done where actually there is a path, like using Trello for personal reasons, using it for small business, for startups, for more obscure business purposes,
Mm.
but there with a graduation to Jira as and when the business requires it. So yeah, it'd be
And,
interesting to see how that plays
and
out.
you know what? And a business opportunity, if Atlassian doesn't do that, maybe between ATech and the Trello Blazers here, right? But maybe we could be that graduation consultant,
Yes. Yeah.
right? We're like, I feel like the solution partners, they focus. Maybe we should take this one offline. But
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
we might have something there
Definitely.
where,
There's something in this for sure.
yeah, because I think in this use case is going to become even more important as Atlassian rolls out the next Jira, because the next
Yeah.
Jira, I think you said it so nicely, right? Where you were like, hey, Trello should be like this beginners type of thing where you're experimenting, you're trying things out, and then when you're ready, when you met certain criteria, you graduate over to Jira. But unfortunately, Jira is becoming more like Trello,
Yeah.
right? Where anything goes, you can get started in seconds. They got the millions of templates. They have AI building out your Jira projects for you. And so I think there's going to be a unique opportunity for companies, businesses, corporations that are trying to get started with these tools and then just like scratching their heads going like, where do we even start? And I think having a dedicated group of individuals that know where to start them would be very
Yeah.
lucrative.
Yeah. No, it
So,
does sound like there's an opportunity to be had there for sure.
yeah. So Mike, we only have a couple minutes here. Where did the Dream Suite come from?
So my I don't like telling the story actually. But so my surname's Day, and when I started my business, actually there was a couple of things going on at the same time. So I left my old company, started the business at the same time. I planned to leave the UK and go traveling. So my wife and I were setting up like a thing for like basically blogging our travels, and we called it Daydreamers. And then that became like the business. So the business was called Daydreamers Consulting for a while, but it didn't ever sound quite right. It's been, like, I had a couple of responses like, well, if you're daydreaming, it doesn't sound like you're very serious. And then I came like sort of evolved this thing called Dream Suite from Daydreamers, so it still had the dream element, and the like tagline was get the business system that you dream of. It's sort of they're rolling that sort of tagline out to the small and medium businesses that I work with, because these are the people who are fighting with like they're just basically running their business off spreadsheets and emails and stuff. So like the Dream Suite is like, oh, we can give you the suite of your dreams that you can actually have and use and it's obtainable. So that's where it came from.
Well, look at that.
But
Maybe
yeah,
we can fold in a little bit of Jira into your suite, and then we're good to go.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's I definitely, like I said, like one of my mottos is that if someone comes to me, I'm not gonna force them down the Trello route if it's wrong. So definitely, I've got it with a few other areas as well. I mean, as I mentioned yesterday, I am kind of a certified Monday partner, but I don't really. It kind of went in a direction that didn't um, fit with what I want to do. So I've got another Monday consultant. So if someone comes to me and it looks like Monday's the right fit, I'll push them that way. But I want the same with other tools as well. So again, this might be an opportunity where like I can talk to that client and flesh it out with Trello, and then say actually over to these guys who are experts in Jira and can help you
Yeah.
make it real. So
Well, we'll have to check it out. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for dreaming here
thank
with
you.
me. And
Always dreaming about Trello.
yeah, appreciate you. And if it makes you feel any better, I'm dreaming about you all day long. I like to tell
Yeah.
people I'm like have you seen that Transformers movie with Shia LaBeouf where like he's just etching all those like images onto the walls?
Yes.
You remember that? It's an older movie. But like when I close my eyes, I see Jira tickets. It's very
Mm.
unhealthy. So
Yeah,
anyway,
but there was a couple of things recently. Like Brit had a problem, and I think she came up with it with the answer sort of in her sleep.
in your sleep.
And I quite often like some of my best Trello ideas, or I think of an answer. It happens in the shower. Quite
But
often, that's
maybe
usually
that's
the
the
place.
spin on the consulting business, which is like, hey, you bring the companies you're working with into like some sort of like a have you heard of the sensory deprivation chambers where you go
Yes.
in? Yeah, maybe you have like this whole like sensory sleeping Jira or Trello journey to clearness of getting to the right headspace to solve your business problems. But anyways,
Yeah.
I do gotta run. Mike, thank you so much for being here, and
Yeah, it's been great.
we'll have to do it too.
We'll be talking again soon, I'm sure.
Yes.